What if the greatest maritime mystery in Canadian history wasn't just about men getting lost, but about how far they were willing to go to survive? In 1845, the Franklin expedition sailed into the Arctic with 129 men and vanished. For over a century, their fate was blamed on ice, starvation, and bad luck. But buried in the frozen ground of the Canadian North lies evidence so disturbing, it permanently changed how we understand survival. This is the story of lead poisoning, desperation, and the unthinkable act of cannibalism. In the mid-1800s, the British Empire was obsessed with one final prize, the Northwest Passage, a sea route through the Arctic that would dominate global trade. To find it, Britain chose a decorated naval officer, Sir John Franklin. Franklin had experience. He had survived Arctic expeditions before, and this time he was given everything: 2 reinforced warships, cutting-edge technology, and enough supplies to last 3 years. The mission was meant to be historic. Instead, it became legendary, for all the wrong reasons. The expedition sailed aboard 2 ships, HMS Erebus and HMS Terror. They were marvels of their time: reinforced hulls, steam engines, heated cabins. Even the food was modern: thousands of tins of preserved meat and vegetables, new technology that promised safety. But that innovation hid a fatal flaw. The cans were sealed with lead solder. No one realized it yet, but the poison was already on board. In the summer of 1845, the expedition entered the Canadian Arctic. By winter, the ships became locked in ice near King William Island. At first, the crew believed the ice would break in spring. It didn't. Year after year, the ships remained frozen. Men weakened, supplies dwindled, and something far more insidious began taking hold. When scientists later examined remains recovered from the Arctic, they discovered extreme levels of lead in the bones and hair, enough to cause confusion, hallucinations, severe weakness, poor judgment. The men weren't just starving. They were being slowly poisoned, every meal making survival harder. Leadership collapsed, discipline eroded, and hope began to disappear. By April 1848, nearly 2 years trapped in ice, the crew made an impossible decision. They abandoned the ships. A handwritten note, later discovered, revealed the truth. Sir John Franklin was dead. 24 men were already gone. The survivors planned to march south, hauling boats across the ice. They were hundreds of kilometers from safety, and winter was never far away. Inuit oral histories describe something haunting: white men dragging sleds, collapsing one by one, leaving bodies behind. Some were found years later, scattered along the coast. But what disturbed researchers most was what they found on the bones. For decades, the idea was dismissed as slander, but modern forensic analysis confirmed it. Human bones showed knife-cut marks, deliberate breakage to extract marrow patterns consistent with survival cannibalism. Men had eaten their dead comrades, not out of savagery, but because there was nothing left. In the 21st century, the Arctic finally gave up its secrets. The wrecks of Erebus and Terror were discovered, eerily preserved beneath icy waters. They confirmed what history feared. The ships were never freed. The men never escaped, and no rescue ever arrived. The Arctic had claimed them completely. The Franklin expedition was meant to symbolize progress. Instead, it revealed the limits of human endurance. Technology failed, empire failed, and survival came at an unbearable cost. Their story is not just about exploration. It's about what happens when confidence meets nature and loses. And somewhere beneath the ice of northern Canada, their silence still remains. If you were trapped in the Arctic, watching your crew die one by one, how far would you go to survive? The Franklin expedition did not end in the Arctic. It ended in London, where silence became unbearable, because when 129 men vanished without a trace, the British Empire refused to accept the answer nature had already given. At the center of the obsession stood one woman, Jane Franklin. She was not an explorer. She never set foot in the Arctic. But she would become one of the most relentless forces driving men into it. For years, she pressured the British Admiralty. She raised private funds. She wrote letters, gave speeches, and refused to mourn. To Jane Franklin, her husband was not dead. He was unfinished. Between 1848 and 1859, the search for Franklin exploded into a full-scale obsession. More than 30 separate expeditions were launched. British naval ships, private vessels, American crews. Even whaling captains were pulled into the hunt. The result? More ships trapped, more men frozen, more expeditions returning broken, or not returning at all. The Arctic did not give answers. It only took more lives. Search parties began finding traces. Not camps, not survivors, but bones, skeletons scattered along coastlines, broken tools, discarded clothing. Some remains were unmistakably human. Others showed signs that no empire wanted to acknowledge. The evidence matched Inuit testimony that had been ignored for decades. The men had not simply died. They had endured until endurance ran out. Again and again, Inuit communities described what they had seen: white men dragging heavy boats, wearing wool instead of fur, eating preserved food instead of fresh meat. They had tried to survive the Arctic as Englishmen. The Inuits survived it by listening. By the time search expeditions began adopting local knowledge, it was already too late. By the time the searches slowed, more men had died looking for Franklin than had died with him. The Arctic had claimed explorers, sailors, searchers, and the idea that determination alone could conquer nature. Franklin became a legend, but legends came at a price. The Franklin expedition didn't just vanish, it echoed. Through search parties, through broken ships, through bones scattered across the tundra. The Arctic never cared about empire. It only answered arrogance with silence. If you were asked to search for a man already claimed by the ice, would you go anyway? For decades, the Franklin expedition was remembered only for how it failed. But in chasing its ghost, something unexpected happened. The Arctic, slowly, reluctantly, began to reveal itself. Before Franklin, much of the Canadian Arctic existed as blank space on European maps. After him, it didn't. Search expeditions charted coastlines that had never been accurately recorded. They mapped islands, straits, and waterways once known only through Inuit knowledge. Ironically, it was the search for a lost expedition that accomplished what the expedition itself could not. The Arctic was no longer unknown. Franklin never found the Northwest Passage, but the men who searched for him proved something just as important. The passage did exist. It was real, but it was never the commercial highway Britain imagined. It was narrow, seasonal, and ruled entirely by ice. The dream of empire gave way to a truth of geography. Perhaps the most important legacy was not mapped in ink. It was learned in failure. Future explorers finally accepted Inuit knowledge: fur over wool, dogs over machines, mobility over permanence. Survival in the Arctic was not about conquering it. It was about adapting to it. That lesson cost hundreds of lives, but it reshaped Arctic exploration forever. Today, Franklin's ships rest on the Arctic seabed, protected, preserved, and studied, not as symbols of triumph, but as warnings. Their legacy is written across Canada's northern maps, in the knowledge that followed their loss, and in the understanding that some places do not yield to ambition, they only endure. The Franklin expedition failed, but its shadow reshaped the Arctic. New lands were mapped, new truths were learned, and the cost of arrogance was written into ice. The North was never conquered. It was understood too late. Was the knowledge gained worth the lives it cost? Or is that a question the Arctic will never answer? Some places don't want to be understood. They only want to be remembered. This is Northern Nightmares.